This 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire beaten unconscious, but she comes from behind and does something no one expected. Watch until the end, you won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching sun of rural Oklahoma beat down on the dusty streets of Harmony Creek when Willow Hayes, just 4 years old, shuffled her bare feet across the cracked asphalt of Main Street. Her tattered clothes, a faded pink dress that had once belonged to another child, hung loosely on her thin frame as she rummaged through the discarded food near the town's general store. The little girl had learned that the best finds were near the dumpsters behind the store right after noon, when merchants discarded bruised fruit and day-old bread. Her large, dark eyes, disproportionate to her gaunt face, scanned every corner for something that could ease the hunger gnawing at her stomach for 2 days. On that sweltering afternoon in March, Willow clutched tightly a small grey shawl that had belonged to her grandmother, the only memory she had left of the woman who had raised her until she was 3. The fabric was worn and stained, but it was her only treasure in this cruel world that had left her orphaned and abandoned on the streets of the small town. The residents of Harmony Creek knew the figure of the girl who wandered the streets well. Some whispered pitying comments as she passed. Others looked away uncomfortably. Willow had learned to become almost invisible, walking close to the walls and avoiding adults who might shoo her away or, worse, hurt her. It was common to see her being kicked out of stores by angry owners, especially when she tried to seek shelter from the hot sun or rain. Reginald Thornton, owner of the largest chain of gas stations in the region, was particularly cruel to her. Just 2 weeks ago, he had literally pushed the girl out of his convenience store, shouting that dirty kids scared away customers. Reginald was known throughout Harmony Creek for his wealth and arrogance. At 52, he had built an empire of gas stations that stretched across several counties. Always wearing expensive suits and driving imported cars, he treated the town's poor as if they were pests that needed to be exterminated. His haughty demeanor and disdainful comments about the bums who dirtied his town were famous among the residents. That afternoon, Willow had found a half-rotten banana and some stale bread near the bakery when she heard raised voices coming from the alley behind the store. Curious as any child, she approached silently, hiding behind a stack of empty crates. What she saw made her freeze in terror. 3 tall, muscular men surrounded a figure lying on the dirty floor of the alley. It was Reginald Thornton, the same man who had humiliated her weeks ago, but now he was unrecognizable. His expensive suit was torn and stained with blood, his face was swollen and cut, and he groaned weakly as he tried to protect himself from the brutal kicks the men were delivering to his body. "You thought you could cheat us, Reginald," growled one of the attackers, a bald man with a scar on his face. "Frank doesn't like it when someone tries to cut into his business." "Please," muttered Reginald, spitting blood. "I didn't know anything. I didn't know you guys were using my company." "Now you do." The second man, shorter but equally intimidating, landed another kick in the businessman's ribs. "And you're gonna pay the price for your ignorance." Willow watched in horror, her little heart beating so hard that she feared the men could hear it. Each blow inflicted on Reginald made her flinch, even remembering how cruel he had been to her. There was something about the vulnerability of that powerful man fallen that touched a deep part of her childish soul. The third aggressor, the tallest of the group, checked his watch. "That's enough for today. Let him think about what we talked about. Next time, he won't be so lucky." The 3 men walked away, leaving Reginald motionless on the dirty floor of the alley. Willow remained hidden for several minutes, hearing only the sound of the injured man's weak moans and the distant noise of traffic on Main Street. When she was sure the attackers were gone, Willow slowly emerged from her hiding place. Reginald was unconscious, his face a mass of bruises and cuts, and blood was flowing from a wound on his forehead. The girl approached cautiously, remembering the kind words her grandmother used to say when she was hurt. Without fully understanding why she was doing it, Willow carefully removed her small grey shawl and placed it over Reginald's wounded face, trying to stop the bleeding. With her soft and trembling little voice, she began to whisper the same words of comfort that her grandmother had used to calm her when she had nightmares. "Don't cry any more now. It's going to be okay. Grandma's here taking care of you." Reginald began to slowly regain consciousness, hearing an angelic voice that seemed to come from far away. His eyes opened partially, but his vision was blurred by pain and swelling. All he could perceive was a small silhouette against the bright sunlight and that sweet voice that brought him back to the world of the living. Who's there?" he muttered, trying to focus his vision. Willow was startled to realize that he had woken up. In the moment of fear, she quickly got up and ran, leaving her shawl behind and disappearing into the labyrinthine alleys of downtown. Reginald tried to get up, but the pain was unbearable. He could only touch the soft fabric that was on his face, trying to process what had happened. Someone had taken care of him. Someone had tried to help him when he was most vulnerable. Minutes later, Evelyn Peterson, the 38-year-old caretaker of the Harmony Creek Community Church, found Reginald in the alley as she returned from the market. She immediately called an ambulance and stayed by his side until the paramedics arrived. But Reginald kept asking about the person who had taken care of him first. "Was there anyone here when you arrived?" he insisted, holding the grey shawl. A voice that helped me." Evelyn looked around the empty alley and shook her head. "I didn't see anyone, Mr. Thornton. I only found you here alone." But Reginald knew that he had not imagined that angelic voice. Someone had taken care of him in his moment of greatest fragility, and he needed to find out who it was. 3 days had passed since the beating, and Reginald Thornton was hospitalized in the small Harmony Creek Municipal Hospital with 2 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and multiple bruises on his body. But the physical pain was insignificant compared to the obsession that consumed his thoughts, finding the person who had taken care of him in that alley. The grey shawl remained on the hospital bedside table, washed and carefully folded by the nurses. Reginald held it constantly, trying to extract some clue about his mysterious savior. The fabric was cheap, clearly used for a long time, and had a subtle smell of common soap mixed with street dust. "Mr. Thornton, you need to rest," insisted Nurse Beverly, a kind woman of 50 who cared for him during the morning shift. "Thinking about these things won't help your recovery." "You don't understand," he muttered, pressing the shawl against his chest. "Someone saved me. Someone took care of me when I was dying in that alley. I need to find that person." Beverly sighed, shaking her head. She had known Reginald for years and had never seen him show any kind of gratitude or vulnerability. The man had always been arrogant, mistreating hospital staff and behaving as if he were superior to everyone. This sudden change intrigued her. During sleepless nights at the hospital, Reginald constantly relived those moments in the alley. He vaguely remembered a soft, almost childlike voice, whispering words of comfort. There was something familiar about that voice, but he couldn't identify what. With each passing hour, his determination to find his savior grew exponentially. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Willow had taken refuge in a small abandoned shed behind the Harmony Creek Community Church. The place was half destroyed, with broken tiles that let the rain in, but offered protection from the scorching sun and the curious eyes of adults. The girl was deeply traumatized by what she had witnessed in the alley. The images of violence were mixed with confused memories of her own difficult childhood, creating constant nightmares that prevented her from sleeping properly. Her small body trembled involuntarily whenever she heard loud male voices, and she had developed a paralyzing fear of leaving the shed during the day. Evelyn Peterson knew that hiding place well. As the church's caretaker for over 10 years, she had discovered Willow's refuge 3 months ago, but had decided not to report the girl to the authorities. Instead, she secretly left food and clean clothes near the shed, always taking care not to scare the frightened child. Evelyn carried her own deep pain. She had lost her only daughter, Sophia, in a traffic accident 5 years ago. The girl was only 6 years old when she was hit by a drunk driver in front of the school. Since then, Evelyn had lived in a state of constant mourning, finding in faith and church work her only sources of solace. Seeing Willow abandoned and frightened awakened in Evelyn a maternal instinct that she thought she had buried along with Sophia. The girl was about the same age as her daughter would be now, and her big, sad eyes painfully reminded her of Sophia's in the last days before the accident, when she complained of headaches that no one took seriously. "My little one," whispered Evelyn as she left a plate of hot food near the shed, "if only you would let me take care of you properly." But Willow was extremely distrustful of adults. Her life experience had taught her that big people were sources of pain and rejection. She accepted the food that Evelyn left, but always hid when the caretaker tried to approach her to talk. On the 4th day after the beating, Reginald was discharged from the hospital against the will of the doctors. His obsession with finding his savior had become uncontrollable, and he could no longer stand still in the hospital. Leaning on crutches and still feeling excruciating pain, he began his systematic search for the city. Reginald was a stubborn man by nature. This characteristic had been fundamental to building his business empire, but it had also destroyed personal relationships over the years. His ex-wife always complained that he never gave up on anything, even when he should. Now that stubbornness was directed entirely towards finding the person who had taken care of him. "I offer $5,000 to anyone who brings me information about the person who helped me in the alley behind the market," he announced loudly and clearly in the town's central square, attracting a crowd of onlookers. "Someone saved me that day, and I need to thank them personally." The news spread quickly through Harmony Creek. It was unusual to see Reginald Thornton showing gratitude for anything, and even stranger to see him offering money to help someone. Residents began to speculate about what had really happened in that alley to cause such a drastic change in the arrogant businessman. Frank Barnes, Reginald's main competitor in the region and owner of a smaller chain of gas stations, watched these developments with growing concern. At 45, Frank was an ambitious and unscrupulous man who had spent the last 2 years planning ways to take over Reginald's business. The beating had been part of a larger plan to intimidate Reginald and force him to sell his stations at ridiculous prices. Frank had discovered some irregularities in Reginald's fuel supply contracts and planned to use this information as blackmail. But now, with Reginald seemingly determined to investigate what had happened, things could get complicated. "Boss, maybe we should have finished the job that day," commented Butch, the bald man with the scar who had led the beating. "Now he's making too much noise, offering rewards and talking to everyone." Frank shook his head, annoyed. "We couldn't kill him. That would bring too much attention from the authorities. The plan was just to scare him enough to accept our purchase proposal. And now? Now we're going to have to speed up our plans. Reginald can't find out that we're behind this." Meanwhile, Reginald continued his tireless search. He visited all the merchants near the store, questioned homeless people, talked to children playing in the square. Each person he met received the same question. "Did you see anyone in the alley behind the store last Tuesday? Someone who could have helped me?" The answers were always negative or vague. Some residents had seen the ambulance, others commented on the unusual activity in the area, but no one admitted to having seen who had taken care of Reginald before the paramedics arrived. During these conversations, Reginald began to notice things he had never noticed before. The extreme poverty of some families, children playing barefoot in the street, people looking for food in the trash. His perspective was gradually changing, and for the first time in years he felt uncomfortable with the social inequality he had always ignored. "How come I never noticed this before?" he muttered to himself as he watched an entire family living under an abandoned awning. This internal transformation created a painful conflict in his mind. On the one hand, he felt genuinely grateful to the person who had saved him and wanted to repay the kindness. On the other hand, his wounded pride prevented him from admitting that he needed someone's help, especially someone who was probably poor, considering the simplicity of the shawl left behind. By the end of the first week of searching, Reginald had questioned practically half the population of Harmony Creek without obtaining any concrete leads. His frustration grew with each passing day, but his determination remained unwavering. He knew that his savior was somewhere in the town, and he would not rest until he found her. What he didn't imagine was that, at that very moment, Willow was watching his movements from afar, hidden among the shadows of the old buildings in the historic downtown. The girl had immediately recognized the man who had kicked her out of his store, and now she saw him desperately searching for her, without having the slightest idea that the person he was looking for was right there, a few feet away, trembling with fear and unable to approach. 2 weeks had passed since Reginald began his obsessive search, and the entire town was talking about the businessman's transformation. Where there had once been an arrogant and cruel man, now an apparently humble individual circulated through the streets, talking to people he had never noticed existed before. Evelyn watched this change with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. During her 15 years living in Harmony Creek, she had witnessed Reginald's cruelty on countless occasions. She had seen him humiliate employees, kick beggars off his property, and treat the poor as if they were dangerous animals. Therefore, she found it hard to believe that a single experience could change a person so much. On that Monday morning, Evelyn was cleaning the church altar when she heard hesitant steps in the entrance. She turned and was surprised to see Reginald Thornton, leaning on his crutches, standing in the doorway with a vulnerable expression that she had never seen on the businessman's face. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice sounding strangely humble. "Of course," replied Evelyn, although her tone was cautious. "The house of God is always open to everyone." Reginald limped to one of the front pews and sat down heavily, the grey shawl always present in his hands. Evelyn continued her work, but kept an eye on the unexpected visitor, intrigued by his presence there. "Evelyn," he said finally, "you've known me for years. You know how I've always been with the people of this town." "I sure do," she replied bluntly, stopping cleaning and turning to face him. "Always treated the poor like they were trash." The caretaker's frankness did not offend Reginald, as it would have before. Instead, he nodded slowly, seeming to accept the accusation as an incontestable fact. "You're right. I was a terrible man, cruel, arrogant, without compassion." He held the shawl tighter. "But someone showed me kindness when I needed it most. Someone took care of me when I was broken and bleeding in that alley." Evelyn felt her heart race. She knew that grey fabric very well, as she had seen Willow wearing it countless times. The girl always carried the shawl, as if it were her most precious possession, wrapping herself in it during the cold nights in the abandoned shed. "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "You know this town better than anyone. You work at the church. You help those in need. You're always attentive to what's happening on the streets." Reginald extended the shawl in her direction. "This fabric belonged to the person who saved me. Maybe you recognize it. Maybe you've seen someone wearing something similar." Evelyn looked at the shawl, pretending to examine it carefully. Her mind worked quickly, processing the implications of that revelation. Willow had been Reginald's mysterious savior. The same girl he had humiliated and kicked out of his store was the one who had taken care of him in his moment of greatest vulnerability. "I don't recognize it," she lied, returning the shawl. "There are many poor people in the town. Fabrics like this are common." Reginald sighed, clearly disappointed. Evelyn, I need to find that person. It's not just gratitude. It's, it's like my life depends on it. I feel like I can't move on without repaying that kindness." The caretaker observed the desperate expression on the businessman's face and felt a pang of internal conflict. On the one hand, she knew that Willow was traumatized and frightened, needing protection. On the other, she realized that Reginald seemed genuinely transformed by the experience. "And if I knew who it was," she asked cautiously, "what would you do?" "I would offer everything I have," he replied immediately. "Money, a house, education, work, anything that person needed to have a better life. And if it was someone you had already mistreated before, someone who has reason to be afraid of you?" Reginald was silent for a long moment, processing the question. "Then I would beg for forgiveness. I would do anything to repair the harm I caused." Evelyn studied his face carefully, looking for signs of sincerity. There was something different about that man, a genuine vulnerability that contrasted drastically with the arrogance he had always shown. "Reginald," she said finally, "if I decide to help you, it will be under my conditions. You can't just appear in that person's life like a hurricane, offering money and expecting everything to be resolved magically." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if it's who I suspect it is, that person is hurt, deeply hurt, and part of that wound may have been caused by you yourself, by the way you have always treated the less fortunate of this town." Evelyn's words hit Reginald like punches to the stomach. The possibility that his savior was someone he had mistreated made him sick. How many people had he humiliated over the years? How many children had he chased off his property? "Tell me what I need to do," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "First, you need to prove that you have really changed. Not just words, but concrete actions. If you really want to honor the kindness you received, start helping other people without expecting anything in return." That afternoon, Reginald left the church with a new mission. He sold his gold watch, a graduation gift that was worth more than $20,000, and used the money to buy basic food baskets. He spent the rest of the day distributing food to the poorest families in the town, many of whom recognized him with surprise and distrust. "It must be some political stunt," they whispered to each other. "Reginald Thornton has never done anything for free in his life." But Reginald persisted, ignoring the skeptical comments. With each family he helped, he felt as if he were paying off a small part of the immense debt he had accumulated with his past cruelty. Meanwhile, Willow watched everything from her hidden position in the shed. The broken windows of the place offered a partial view of the town square, where Reginald distributed food and spoke patiently with people he had previously despised. The girl was confused. Her memories of Reginald's cruelty were vivid and painful, but the man she saw now seemed completely different. There was kindness in his gestures, patience in his voice, and something she had never seen before in his eyes, genuine humility. "Why did he change?" she whispered to herself, holding tightly a piece of bread that Evelyn had left for her. At night, Evelyn visited the shed as she always did, but this time she decided to try a more direct approach. Instead of just leaving food and leaving, she sat outside Willow's hiding place and began to speak softly. "I know you're in there, little one. You don't have to be afraid of me." Willow remained silent, but Evelyn could hear her irregular breathing through the loose boards of the wall. "I want to talk to you about the man you helped in the alley, Mr. Thornton." This time, there was movement inside the shed. Evelyn heard Willow's small steps approaching the wall that separated them. "He's looking for you," continued Evelyn. "He's been looking for weeks. He wants to thank you personally for the kindness you showed." "He'll hurt me," came Willow's small, frightened voice through the wall. "He pushed me, called me dirty." Evelyn's heart broke to hear the fear in the girl's voice. "He's different now, my dear. What you did for him changed something inside him." "People don't change," replied Willow with a sad wisdom that should not exist in a 4-year-old. "Adults always hurt." Evelyn rested her hand on the wall, wishing she could hug the frightened girl. "I understand why you think that way. But sometimes, when something very special happens, people can find a good part inside them that was hidden for a long time. There was a long silence before Willow asked, "Do you think he really changed?" "I think he's trying to change. And maybe, if you want, we can help him become the person he should have been from the beginning." That night, for the first time in weeks, Willow was able to sleep without nightmares. And on the other side of town, Reginald also slept deeply, dreaming of an angelic voice that had saved him and now, perhaps, would help him save himself from himself. A week had passed since the conversation at the church, and Reginald continued his routine of distributing food and helping the needy of Harmony Creek. His actions were beginning to generate positive comments for the first time in years, but they were also attracting the attention of people who preferred to see him maintaining his reputation as a cruel and distant man. Owen Phillips, Reginald's personal accountant for over 10 years, watched his boss's transformation with growing nervousness. At 42, Owen was an apparently respectable man, married, father of 2 children, but for years he had been diverting small amounts from the company's accounts to finance a secret gambling addiction. On that Thursday morning, Owen was in his office reviewing the accounting books when he received a call that made him pale. "Frank wants to talk to you," said the rough voice on the other end of the line. "Today, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, at the warehouse off Highway 44. Owen knew he couldn't refuse. 2 years ago, Frank had discovered his financial irregularities and, instead of reporting him, had proposed a lucrative partnership. The accountant would provide privileged information about Reginald's operations, and in return, Frank would ensure that his small diversions were never discovered. What had started as occasional information about contracts and suppliers had gradually turned into something much more serious. Frank was using the data provided by Owen to sabotage Reginald's businesses, steal customers, and more recently, create fraudulent contracts that allowed money laundering through the gas station chain. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, an abandoned shed that Frank had bought years ago. When Owen arrived at the site, he found not only Frank, but also the 3 men who had beaten Reginald weeks before. "Owen, my friend," said Frank with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we need to talk about your boss." "What about Reginald?" asked Owen, trying to control the nervousness in his voice. "He's been asking a lot of questions, talking to people, offering rewards, calling unnecessary attention." Frank walked around Owen like a predator circling its prey. "That's not good for our business. He's just looking for the person who helped him in the alley. It has nothing to do with the company." "Oh, but it does." Frank stopped in front of the accountant. "You know what happens when someone gets paranoid after being attacked? They start investigating everything around them. They start asking questions about businesses they should leave alone." Butch, the bald man who had led the beating, approached Owen. "Your boss found something about the supply contracts. He was messing with the old files yesterday." Owen's blood ran cold. The fraudulent contracts were mixed with legitimate documentation in the company's files. If Reginald found them and decided to investigate more deeply— "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice coming out as a whisper. "We want you to speed up our operation," replied Frank. "We have 3 more contracts to process this month. I need you to make them go unnoticed in the system. But they're very high values. Reginald will notice." "Reginald is distracted with his obsessive search. It's the perfect opportunity." Frank leaned closer to Owen. "And if he discovers anything, you will convince him that they were system errors, technical problems. You're smart, you'll figure it out." Owen knew he was lost. Each favor he did for Frank entangled him more deeply in the web of corruption. But now it was too late to back down. If Reginald discovered the truth, he would not only lose his job but would probably be arrested for complicity. And if he doesn't accept the explanations? If he insists on investigating? Frank's smile became cruel. "Then we'll have to find a more permanent way to solve the problem." That same afternoon, while Owen struggled with his conscience in the office, Reginald was in the town square distributing more food baskets when he was approached by Evelyn. The caretaker seemed nervous, constantly looking around as if she feared being watched. "Reginald, I need to talk to you." "Alone." They walked to an isolated corner of the square, away from the curious ears of the residents who still watched with suspicion the businessman's new charitable routine. "It's about the person you're looking for," said Evelyn in a low voice. "I know who it is." Reginald's heart leaped. After weeks of fruitless searching, he would finally have an answer. "Who? Where can I find her?" "It's a child," replied Evelyn, carefully watching his reaction. "A 4-year-old girl, orphaned, who has been living on the streets for months." Reginald was in shock. A child. His mysterious savior was just a child. The implications of that revelation hit him like successive waves. If a child had taken care of him, it meant that she was close enough to the alley to witness the beating. It meant that a little girl had witnessed that brutal violence. "My God," he murmured, "a child saw all that? Saw those men beating me?" Yes, and she was traumatized. She developed a paralyzing fear of adults, especially men. She can hardly sleep because of the nightmares. The guilt that Reginald felt for his obsessive search multiplied exponentially. Not only had a child been exposed to that violence, but now she was suffering the psychological consequences of having witnessed something so brutal. "Where is she? I need to help her somehow." "She's hiding, very scared." "And there's something else you need to know." Evelyn took a deep breath before continuing. "You've met this girl before, more than once." "What do you mean?" "Remember the girl you kicked out of your convenience store a few weeks ago? The one you called dirty and pushed outside?" Reginald's face paled as the memory returned with painful clarity. He remembered that day perfectly. A little girl in torn clothes had entered his store seeking shelter from the rain. He had been annoyed by the presence of the dirty child and had expelled her without any consideration. "It was her," he whispered, feeling nauseous. "The girl who saved me was the same one that you humiliated and hurt," completed Evelyn without pity. "The same girl you treated like trash was the one who took care of you when you were broken and bleeding." Reginald leaned against a nearby tree, feeling his legs weaken. The irony of the situation was devastating. The person he had obsessively searched for to thank was the same one he had cruelly mistreated. How could he face that child knowing what he had done? "She hates me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "How wouldn't she? I was cruel to her, and even so she helped me. What kind of monster am I?" "A monster that can redeem himself," replied Evelyn firmly. "But only if you're willing to face the truth about yourself and work hard to deserve her forgiveness." At that moment, a black car approached the square and stopped near them. Frank Barnes got out of the vehicle accompanied by 2 of his henchmen. His face was grim, and his eyes scanned the scene with obvious disapproval. "Reginald," he said, approaching with firm steps, "we need to talk." "Frank," replied Reginald, straightening up instinctively. "What do you want?" "I want to know why you're spreading money around the town like it's confetti. It's not good for the image of the region's business owners." Evelyn moved away discreetly, but remained close enough to hear the conversation. Something about Frank's demeanor made her uncomfortable. "My money, my decisions," replied Reginald, trying to keep his voice steady. "Your decisions affect all of us. When you give handouts on the street, you make the other business owners look greedy. When you talk to bums, you diminish the prestige of our class. Since when do you care about prestige, Frank? I always knew you were ambitious, but I never thought you were so petty." Frank's face hardened. "Watch your words, Reginald. You've been very distracted lately. You might end up making hasty decisions you'll regret." There was something in the way Frank uttered those words that made an alarm go off in Reginald's mind. It was almost like a threat disguised as advice. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that distracted men make mistakes. They sign contracts without reading them. They trust the wrong people. They leave gaps that can be exploited by less scrupulous competitors. Reginald felt a chill in his stomach. There was something sinister in the way Frank spoke, as if he knew things he shouldn't know. "Frank, if you have something to tell me, say it clearly. I've said everything I needed to say. I just hope you reconsider your new philanthropic phase. It may be more dangerous than you imagine." With those threatening words, Frank returned to his car and left, leaving Reginald with the disturbing certainty that there was much more happening behind the scenes than he understood. The revelation about Willow's identity had left Reginald in a state of shock for 3 days. He could barely eat, slept only a few hours a night, and spent his time walking through the town trying to process the magnitude of his discovery. The cruel irony of the situation gnawed at him from the inside. The child who had saved his life was the same one he had treated with absolute contempt. Evelyn watched the businessman's suffering with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. On the one hand, she felt that he deserved to face the consequences of his past cruelty. On the other, she saw that his anguish was genuine and that he really wanted to redeem himself. On Sunday morning, Evelyn made a courageous decision. She found Reginald sitting alone on the bench in the square, staring fixedly at the grey shawl he always carried with him. "Reginald," she said, sitting next to him, "it's time for you to meet her properly." He looked up, a mixture of hope and terror stamped on his face. "Does she agree to see me? After everything I've done?" "She's curious. She's been watching you from afar during these weeks, seeing how you've changed. Children notice things that adults ignore. And if she gets scared, what if I say something wrong?" Evelyn held his arm firmly. "Then you'll have to learn to be patient, to earn her trust little by little. A traumatized child doesn't heal overnight." 2 hours later, Evelyn guided Reginald through the back of the church to the abandoned shed where Willow was hiding. The businessman was more nervous than he had ever been in any multi-million-dollar negotiation of his career. "She's in there," whispered Evelyn. "I'm going to call her, but you need to stay well away initially. Let her approach in her own time." Willow appeared slowly at the entrance to the shed, a small and fragile figure in tattered clothes that Evelyn had managed to get for her. Her large, dark eyes studied Reginald with an intensity that was disturbing for a 4-year-old. She recognized him, of course. It was impossible to forget the man who had pushed her and humiliated her. Reginald felt his heart break at the sight of the girl. She was visibly malnourished. Her thin arms showed scratches and small scars, and there was a deep sadness in her eyes that no child should carry. "Hi," he said softly, keeping several feet away as Evelyn had instructed. "My name is Reginald." Willow didn't answer, but she didn't run away either. She remained at the entrance to the shed, ready to hide if he made any sudden movements. I wanted to thank you," continued Reginald, his voice trembling slightly, "for what you did for me that day in the alley." "Why did you hurt me before?" asked Willow suddenly, her voice small but clear. "Why were you mean to me?" The child's direct question was like a stab in Reginald's chest. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for days, but no answer seemed adequate. "Because I was a bad person," he answered honestly. "I was selfish, cruel, and I didn't think about the feelings of others, especially of children like you who needed help. And now I want to be different. I want to be the kind of person who deserves the kindness you showed me." Willow studied him for a long moment, as if she could see through his soul. "You won't push me again?" "Never again, I promise." The girl took a small step out of the shed, still keeping a safe distance. "Aunt Evelyn said that you are giving food to people." "I am. Because I learned that there are many people suffering, as you were suffering, and I had never paid attention. My grandma used to say that when someone does something bad, they have to do a lot of good things to make up for it." The child's simple wisdom touched Reginald deeply. "Your grandma was very wise, and she was right. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for all the bad things I've done." At that moment, the sound of tires screeching on the nearby street broke the tranquility of the meeting. A car had braked sharply, and loud voices echoed from the direction of the church. Evelyn tensed immediately. "Stay here," she said, running to check what was happening. Reginald and Willow were alone for the first time, the tension in the air palpable. The girl had retreated back to the entrance of the shed, frightened by the strange sounds. "Don't worry," said Reginald softly. "It must be just someone who had problems with their car." But his instincts told him that something was wrong. The sounds didn't seem like a common accident. There was something deliberate, threatening in what was happening. Evelyn came running back, her face pale with concern. "We have to get out of here now." "What happened?" asked Reginald, getting up quickly. "Strange men are asking about you at the church. They said they know you were here and they want to talk." Reginald's blood ran cold. Frank had not made empty threats. His henchmen had come after him, and now Willow and Evelyn were in danger because of him. "You two are going to go out the back of the shed," he said quickly. "There's a trail that leads to the woods. Evelyn, you know the way." "What about you?" asked Evelyn. "I'm going to face them. I can't let you get hurt because of me." Willow, who had heard the whole conversation, ran to Reginald and held his hand with surprising strength for such a small child. "Don't go," she said, her big eyes full of fear. "They'll hurt you again." The girl's genuine concern for his safety touched Reginald more deeply than any demonstration of gratitude could have done. After everything he had been through, after how he had treated her, she still cared about him. "I'm going to be okay," he said, kneeling down to get to her eye level. "But I need you to go with Aunt Evelyn and be safe. Promise you'll come find us later?" "I promise." Willow hesitated for a moment, then approached and hugged him quickly before running to Evelyn. The hug lasted only seconds, but it was the first positive physical contact that Reginald had received in weeks. Evelyn took Willow's hand, and the two disappeared down the trail behind the shed, leaving Reginald alone to face his pursuers. He walked in the direction of the church, preparing for what was to come. He found 3 men waiting for him in the churchyard. He immediately recognized Butch and his accomplices, the same ones who had beaten him weeks ago. "Reginald," said Butch with a cruel smile, "what a coincidence to find you here. Frank wants to talk to you. Tell Frank that if he wants to talk to me, he can schedule a meeting at my office." "No, no, no, you don't understand." Butch approached, the other 2 men flanking Reginald. "It's not an invitation. It's an order." Reginald realized that he was surrounded, with no chance of escape. But one thing had changed since the last meeting with these men. Now he had something to fight for. He had Willow and Evelyn to protect. "Before we go," he said, trying to buy time, "I want to know one thing. Why is Frank doing this? What does he really want?" Butch laughed. "You really don't know? Your own accountant has been selling information about your company for years. Frank is using your stations to launder money, and you've been signing the contracts without even reading them." The revelation about Owen hit Reginald like a punch. His accountant, whom he had trusted for over a decade, had been working against him all along. Owen. Exactly. And now that you're asking too many questions, becoming a risk to the operation, Frank decided it's time to take more drastic measures. The men moved closer, and Reginald prepared to fight. But this time, he wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the right to redeem himself, for the right to protect a courageous girl who had saved his soul when she saved his life. And deep in the woods, hidden behind old trees, Willow and Evelyn heard the sound of a new fight starting. Knowing that the man they had begun to accept was again in mortal danger, the fight in the churchyard was brutal but brief. This time, Reginald wasn't caught completely off guard as he had been in the alley. He managed to land a few blows on Butch before being overwhelmed by the 3 men. When they finally subdued him, he was bleeding from a cut on his lip and felt pain in his ribs, but his determination remained intact. "Take him to the warehouse," ordered Butch, wiping blood from his nose. "Frank is waiting." They threw Reginald into the back seat of a black car and drove through the outskirts of the city until they reached the same warehouse where Owen had met with Frank days before. The place was isolated, surrounded by vacant lots and dirt roads that would hardly receive unwanted visitors. Frank was waiting inside the warehouse, sitting in a wooden chair as if it were an improvised throne. Next to him, Owen remained standing, visibly nervous and avoiding Reginald's gaze. "Ah, Reginald," said Frank with false cordiality. "I'm glad you could come. We have a lot to talk about." "Owen," said Reginald, ignoring Frank and addressing the accountant directly. "Is it true? Are you really working against me?" Owen finally raised his eyes, and Reginald saw in them a mixture of guilt, fear, and despair. "Reginald, I didn't want it to come to this. Answer my question. Is it true?" "Yes," whispered Owen. "I've been passing information to Frank for 2 years." The confirmation of the betrayal hit Reginald with devastating force. Owen was not only his accountant, but one of the few people he really trusted. They had worked together for a decade, and Reginald considered the man almost a friend. "Why?" he asked, his voice choked by the pain of the discovery. "Because he discovered me embezzling money from the company," replied Owen, tears beginning to run down his face. "I had gambling debts. I was desperate. I took small amounts that I thought you would never notice, and instead of coming to talk to me, you preferred to betray me. Frank said that if I cooperated, he wouldn't tell you about the diversions. He said it was just passing some information about competitors, nothing that would really hurt you." Frank rose from the chair, clearly pleased with the drama that was unfolding before him. "Ah, but that was just the beginning, wasn't it, Owen? Tell him about the special contracts." Owen swallowed hard. "Frank is using your stations to launder money. We created false supply contracts that allow us to transfer illegal values through your business accounts." "How much?" $2 million in the last 6 months, Reginald Thornton asked, a wave of nausea washing over him. The number was devastating. Reginald realized his company had been used as a front for criminal operations for months, and he'd signed documents without properly reviewing them, blindly trusting Owen Phillips. "What if the authorities find out?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "You'll be held accountable," Frank Barnes said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "After all, it's your signatures on the contracts, your company processing the payments. Owen is just an employee following orders." "Reginald, I'm so sorry," Owen said, openly sobbing now. "I never wanted it to go this far. Frank promised it would only be temporary, that he would help me pay off my debts, and everything would go back to normal." "You believed that?" Reginald asked, incredulity mixed with pity in his voice. "I was desperate. My family doesn't know anything. My kids. If they find out their dad is a thief—" Frank interrupted the dramatic moment with a cruel laugh. "How touching. Now that you know everything, Reginald, we can move on to the interesting part of our conversation." "What interesting part?" "The part where you sell me all your gas stations for a symbolic price. Let's say $500,000 for everything." "That's ridiculous. My stations are worth at least $20 million. "They were. But now that they're implicated in money laundering, their value has plummeted considerably." Frank walked until he was face to face with Reginald. "Think carefully. You can sell me everything for $500,000 and leave town with some money in your pocket, or you can refuse and face the consequences when the authorities find out what's happening." "What if I report you?" "With what proof?" "Owen will testify that all the operations were authorized by you. The contracts have your signature. The transfers were made through your accounts." Frank smirked. "You'd be the only one to blame." Reginald realized he was in a near-perfect trap. Frank had meticulously planned everything, using Owen as the central piece of a scheme that would leave Reginald with no way out. "I need time to think," he said, trying to buy time to find a loophole in the situation. "You have until tomorrow at noon," Frank replied. "After that, I'll make a few calls to acquaintances of mine in the district attorney's office. I'm sure they'd be very interested in investigating your business activities." Butch and his cronies escorted Reginald back to his car. During the drive back to town, he tried to process the magnitude of his situation. In a few hours, he had discovered that his company was being used to launder money, that his trusted accountant had been betraying him for years, and that he was about to lose everything he had built. More importantly, he had put Willow Hayes and Evelyn Peterson in danger. Frank certainly knew they had witnessed part of the confrontation at Harmony Creek Community Church, and men like him didn't leave witnesses running loose. When he was finally dropped off near downtown, Reginald rushed back to the woods behind the church, hoping to find Willow and Evelyn at their agreed meeting place. But when he arrived, he found only Evelyn, sitting alone on a rock, tears in her eyes. "Where's Willow?" he asked, immediately alarmed. "She ran," Evelyn replied, her voice choked with emotion. "When we heard the sounds of the fight stopping, she panicked, thinking you had been killed. I tried to stop her, but she's too fast. She ran back to town. We have to find her. Frank and his men might be looking for her. I've been searching for 2 hours. She knows hiding places around town that even I don't know about." Reginald felt despair welling up in his chest. Willow was alone somewhere, possibly being hunted by dangerous criminals, all because of his situation. "Evelyn, I need to tell you what I've found out," he said, sitting down beside her. "Frank is using my company to launder money. My accountant has been working for him for years, and now they want me to sell everything or they'll frame me as an accomplice." Evelyn listened in silence, processing the implications of what he was telling her. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. If I don't sell, I'll go to prison. If I sell, I'll be left with nothing, but at least free." He paused, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "But none of that matters if Willow is in danger. She's a survivor," Evelyn said softly. "She spent months living alone on the streets before we found her hideout. She knows how to take care of herself better than most adults. But she's just a kid, and she's traumatized. She shouldn't have to take care of herself." It was at that moment that Reginald made a decision that would change everything. "Evelyn, I'm going to accept Frank's offer." "What?" "I'm going to sell everything to him. With $500,000, I can take you and Willow far away from here. We can start over somewhere else, where she'll be safe." "Reginald, you can't give up everything you've built for our sake." "I can, because I've learned that money and possessions mean nothing if you don't have people you love to share them with." He looked directly into her eyes. "Willow saved me, and now it's my turn to save her, even if it means losing everything else." That night, as they desperately searched for Willow through the dark streets of Harmony Creek, neither of them knew that the girl was hidden in the abandoned attic of an old house downtown, watching through the cracked window as Frank's men patrolled the streets looking for her, and that she had overheard every word of the threatening conversation between the criminals about what they would do when they found her. Night fell over Harmony Creek like a heavy shroud, and Willow remained hidden in the attic of the abandoned house, observing through the cracked window the suspicious movements in the streets. Since sunset, she had seen at least 6 different men circulating in the area, all with the same threatening posture she recognized from the thugs who had beaten Reginald. The girl had chosen that hiding place out of survival instinct. The house was a 19th century colonial building that had been abandoned by its owners years ago. Access to the attic was via a rotten wooden ladder that barely supported the weight of a child, making it unlikely that adults would try to climb it. Willow understood more about danger than any child should. She had learned to read people's intentions from their eyes, their posture, their tone of voice. And everything she saw in the men looking for her screamed violence and threat. "She has to be around here somewhere," she heard a rough voice coming from the street. "A kid doesn't just disappear into thin air." "Boss said to search the whole town if necessary," another voice replied. She saw too much. Willow's small heart beat so hard she feared they could hear it through the walls. She pressed herself against the darkest wall of the attic, trying to become invisible, a skill she had honed during months living on the streets. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Reginald and Evelyn continued their desperate search. They had separated to cover more ground, agreeing to meet in the town square every hour to share information. Reginald visited every place he had seen Willow before. The outskirts of the town's general store, the alleys near the shops, the back streets where she used to look for food. In each place, he showed the girl's description to shopkeepers and residents, offering rewards for any information. "I saw her running down Main Street a few hours ago," said Mrs. Peterson, owner of a small bakery. "She looked terrified, as if she was running away from someone." "Which way did she go?" "Towards downtown. But Mr. Thornton, there are strange men asking the same questions. They don't seem to have good intentions." Mrs. Peterson's warning confirmed Reginald's worst fears. Frank had unleashed his henchmen to hunt Willow, and they had the advantage because they knew the town and had more resources. On the other end of town, Evelyn visited the homeless community that gathered under the Highway 44 overpass. She knew many of these people through her work at the Harmony Creek Community Church, and she knew they had an efficient information network about everything that happened on the streets. "The girl ran past here about 3 hours ago," said Joaquin, a 60-year-old man who had lived under the overpass for more than a decade. "She was very scared. She didn't even stop to take the food I offered her." "And did you see anyone else looking for her?" "Yes, we did. Men in suits with unfriendly faces. They offered money for information about her." Joaquin spat on the ground with contempt. "We didn't say anything. A scared child deserves protection, not persecution." Evelyn felt a wave of gratitude for the solidarity of those people who, even having so little, understood the importance of protecting a child in danger. Back in the attic, Willow heard the sounds of a systematic search getting closer. Doors being forced open, authoritarian voices demanding entry into houses, barks of dogs that had been brought in to help with the search. The girl knew it was a matter of time before they found her hiding place. She needed to move, but where to? The whole town seemed to be watched, and she knew the dangers of wandering the streets at night. It was then that she remembered something her grandmother had taught her. "When you're very scared, honey, look for God's house. There you will always find protection." The church. It was risky, as it was far from where she was. But it might be her best chance. The bad men wouldn't expect her to go back to the place where it all started. Willow carefully descended the rotten ladder, testing each step before putting her weight on it. The sound of creaking wood seemed deafening in the silence of the abandoned house. When she finally reached the ground floor, she peeked through the front window. The street was momentarily empty, but she could see lantern lights moving 2 blocks ahead. She had a small window of opportunity to escape. She left through the back door of the house and began to move through the shadows, using all the urban survival techniques she had learned. She kept close to the walls, avoided lit areas, stopped constantly to listen if she was being followed. The journey to the Harmony Creek Community Church, which would normally take 15 minutes walking, took more than an hour. Willow had to hide 3 times when search parties passed nearby, once staying still behind a dumpster for more than 20 minutes. When she finally saw the spires of the Harmony Creek Community Church on the horizon, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was almost there, but she was also returning to the place where the danger had begun. At that moment, in the town square, Reginald and Evelyn met again for another exchange of information. Both were exhausted and desperate, with no concrete clues as to where Willow might be. "We have to call the police," Evelyn said, her voice choked with worry. "We can't," Reginald replied. "Frank has contacts in all spheres of the city. If we call the authorities, he'll know immediately, and that could put Willow in even more danger. So what do? We can't search the whole town alone. Let's divide downtown. It's the most logical place for her to hide. There are many abandoned houses and dark alleys." Reginald paused, looking in the direction of the church. "You take the east side, I'll take the west, and we'll meet at the church in 2 hours." As they spoke, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching them from afar. Butch was parked 3 blocks away, using binoculars to monitor their movements. "Boss," he said over the radio, "they're looking for the girl too. They just split up. What do we do?" "Follow them both," came Frank's response. "If they find the kid, you intervene immediately. We can't allow her to tell the authorities what she saw." Willow reached the back of the church just as the bell struck midnight. The shed where she had hidden for weeks was still there, but she knew it would be the first place they would look. She needed a better hiding place. It was then that she noticed a faint light coming from inside the church. Someone was in there, even though it was so late. She carefully approached one of the side windows and peered inside. It was Father Michael, the elderly pastor of the church, praying alone before the altar. Willow knew him by sight, as she sometimes saw him talking to Evelyn during the day. He seemed like a kind person, but she was still afraid to trust adults. She decided to hide in the vestry, a small annex of the church where religious objects were kept. The door was always unlocked, and there were many places where a small child could hide between the closets and old chests. She managed to enter without being seen by the priest, and settled behind a large cabinet where she found some old vestments that she could use as a blanket. For the first time in hours, she felt relatively safe, but the safety was short-lived. About 20 minutes later, she heard rough voices outside the church. "Are you sure she could be here? It's where it all started. A scared child always returns to the place she considers safe. What if the priest sees us? Father Michael is deaf and half-blind. It won't be a problem." Willow heard the sounds of heavy footsteps entering the church, followed by the frightened voice of Father Michael, asking who was there. There was a brief argument, then a muffled sound that made her freeze in terror. They had done something to the priest. The footsteps were approaching the vestry, and Willow knew she had only seconds before she was discovered. She looked desperately around, looking for a way out, when she saw a small, high window in the back wall. It was her only chance of escape, but it meant leaving Father Michael alone with those cruel men. For the first time in her life, Willow faced a moral dilemma that would test all her childish courage: save herself, or try to help someone who was in danger because of her. Willow remained frozen behind the cabinet for long seconds, listening to Father Michael's muffled groans and the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the vestry. Her childish mind wrestled between the instinct for self-preservation and something deeper her grandmother had planted in her heart, the inability to abandon someone in need. "Search everything," said a rough voice she recognized as Butch's. "The kid has to be here somewhere." "What if she's not?" another man asked. "Then we'll teach the priest a lesson about lying to us. Old folks sometimes know more than they let on." The sound of closets being opened and objects being thrown on the floor filled the vestry. Willow knew she had only minutes before she was discovered. She looked again at the high window, calculating if she could reach it by climbing on the furniture. It was then that she heard Father Michael groan louder, clearly in pain. The image of the kind old man being hurt because of her was too much for the girl's sensitive heart. Without thinking about the consequences, she came out of her hiding place. "Stop!" she shouted with her small but determined voice. "Don't hurt him!" The 3 men turned around in surprise. Butch grinned cruelly as he saw the small, fragile figure standing in the entrance to the vestry, trembling but with her fists clenched in a touching display of courage. "Look who decided to show up," he said, approaching slowly like a predator circling its prey. "The little hero who wants to save everyone." Willow took a step back, but kept her chin up. "Let Father Michael go. He didn't do anything wrong." "You're right. He didn't do anything, but you saw things you shouldn't have seen." Butch crouched down to be at her eye level. "Now you'll have to come with us for a little chat with our boss." "I won't," Willow said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're bad men." The child's simple and direct answer irritated Butch. He reached out to grab her, but Willow was faster. She ran between his legs and headed for the main altar of the church, where Father Michael was lying on the floor, conscious but clearly hurt. "Father Michael!" she cried, kneeling beside the old man. "Are you okay?" The priest, even dazed, managed to whisper, "Run, my child. Get out of here." But Willow wouldn't abandon the old man. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone present. She began to scream with all the strength of her small lungs. "Help! Help! There are bad men in the church! Help!" Her voice echoed through the stone walls of the church, amplified by the acoustics of the place. The sound was deafening in the silence of the early morning, and it would certainly be heard by anyone nearby. "Shut that kid up!" Butch growled, running towards her. But before he could reach her, the main door of the church burst open. Reginald ran in, followed by Evelyn and 3 other locals who had heard the screams. "Willow!" Reginald shouted as he saw the girl kneeling next to the injured priest. The situation changed dramatically in seconds. Butch and his cronies found themselves outnumbered and in a defensive position. But they were dangerous men and would not hesitate to use violence to escape. "Nobody move!" Butch shouted, pulling out a knife. "The girl comes with us, or everyone here gets hurt." Reginald took a step forward, placing himself between the criminals and Willow. "You won't touch her. You've caused enough damage." "Reginald, you don't understand the situation," Butch said with a cruel smile. "Frank isn't playing around. He wants the girl, and he'll get what he wants." "Why is she so important?" Evelyn asked, helping Father Michael sit up. "Because she saw our boss beating Reginald in the alley. She's a witness that could compromise our entire operation." The revelation struck Reginald like lightning. All this time he had thought that Frank wanted to silence Willow because she had witnessed the beating he had suffered. But the truth was much worse. Frank had personally participated in the attack. "You were there," Reginald said, the realization forming in his mind. "Frank was in the alley when I was beaten." "Of course he was. Do you think an operation of this magnitude would be left in the hands of just employees?" Butch laughed. "Frank wanted to make sure you understood the message." The anger that Reginald felt multiplied exponentially. Frank was not just an ambitious competitor or an opportunistic criminal. He had personally participated in the brutal violence that had almost killed Reginald. "And now," Butch continued, "we're going to take the girl to make sure she never tells anyone what she saw. We don't want her to grow up and become a future problem." His words were like a death sentence for Willow. Everyone present understood that if the criminals took the girl, she would never be seen alive again. It was at that moment that Willow made a decision that surprised everyone. She stood up from beside Father Michael and walked towards Butch, her little legs trembling but her eyes determined. "I'll go with you," she said, her small but clear voice. "No!" Reginald and Evelyn shouted simultaneously. "But," Willow continued, raising her pinky finger as she had seen adults do, "only if you promise not to hurt anyone else. Not Father Michael, not Uncle Reginald, not Aunt Evelyn." The child's proposal left everyone in silence. She was offering to sacrifice her own safety to protect the people she loved. Butch seemed to consider the offer for a moment. "Smart girl. But you're not in a position to negotiate." "Yes, I am," Willow replied, with a courage that defied her age. "Because you need me alive so I don't tell secrets. But if you hurt my friends, I'm going to scream and tell everyone I find." The child's simple but effective logic created a stalemate. Butch realized that forcing the situation through violence would only create more problems and witnesses. "Willow," Reginald said, approaching slowly, "you don't have to sacrifice yourself for us. We'll find another solution." "There's no other solution," she replied, looking at him with a deep sadness in her eyes. "Bad men always hurt good people. At least this way, I can choose who doesn't get hurt." The devastating maturity of Willow's response hit everyone present like a punch to the gut. A 4-year-old child had developed a dark understanding of violence and sacrifice that no child should have. Reginald felt something break inside him. All his wealth, all his business power, all his influence in the city were useless at that moment. He could not protect an innocent child who had saved his life. "Wait," he said, a desperate idea forming in his mind. "Butch, tell Frank that I accept his offer. I'll sell all the gas stations for the price he offered. Today." And what does that change? It changes that if he gets what he wants without violence, there'll be no reason to hurt anyone. Willow is just a child. Even if she tells what she saw, who will believe the word of an orphan girl against that of a respected businessman? Butch hesitated, clearly considering the logic of the proposal. He called Frank and had a hushed conversation for a few minutes. "Boss accepts," he said finally, "but he wants guarantees. The girl stays with us until the papers are signed. If you try anything, she pays the price." "No," Reginald said firmly. "She stays here. You have my word as a businessman. Your word is worth nothing after all the complications you've caused." Butch approached Willow again. "The girl comes with us. It's the only guarantee we accept." It was then that Father Michael, supported by Evelyn, managed to get up and walk to the center of the church. His voice, although weak, echoed through the sacred walls with spiritual authority. "In the name of God," he said, extending his arms protectively over Willow, "I offer sanctuary to this child. Whoever touches her within this sacred house will have to face not only men, but the Creator himself." The priest's declaration created a moment of religious tension that stirred even the hardened criminals. The tradition of sanctuary in churches was ancient and respected, even by those who did not follow the faith. Butch looked around, realizing that the situation had become more complex than he expected. He had a church full of witnesses, a priest offering divine protection, and a child whose courage was inspiring everyone present to resist. "This isn't over," he said finally, backing towards the door. "Frank will get what he wants, one way or another." After the criminals left, Willow finally broke down. All the courage she had demonstrated dissolved into tears of terror and exhaustion. Reginald picked her up in his arms, and for the first time she allowed herself to be comforted by an adult without fear. Dawn arrived in Harmony Creek with a golden light that contrasted cruelly with the darkness of the events of the previous night. Willow had finally fallen asleep in Evelyn's arms after hours of crying and trembling, while Reginald remained awake in the church, standing guard and trying to find a way out of the impossible situation in which they found themselves. Father Michael, even with injuries to his head and body, had insisted on remaining in the church to offer continuous protection. His unwavering faith seemed to create an invisible barrier that kept the criminals away, at least temporarily. "Reginald," said the priest, sitting heavily on one of the front pews, "you know I can't keep this child safe forever. Religious sanctuary has moral power, but not legal." "I know, Father. I'm trying to think of a solution." Reginald looked at Willow, who was sleeping curled up like an injured bird. "I can't let anything happen to her." "And you are willing to lose everything you have built in life for a child you have only known for a few weeks?" The priest's question was direct and challenging. Reginald thought for a long moment before answering. "Father, for 40 years I built an empire based on selfishness, greed, and contempt for others. This child showed me kindness when I least deserved it, and taught me that there is something more important than money and power." He knelt beside the pew where Willow was sleeping. "If I lose everything to save her, I'll still come out ahead." Evelyn, who had overheard the conversation, approached the two men. "Reginald, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Willow that could change everything." "What do you mean?" "She's not completely orphaned. She has a living grandmother." The revelation struck Reginald like lightning. "A grandmother? Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because the situation is complicated. Willow's grandmother is Cecilia Parker, a 74-year-old lady who lives on the outskirts of town. She didn't abandon Willow out of cruelty." "Then why?" Evelyn looked around, making sure there were no unwanted ears. "Because Cecilia has been blackmailed for months. Frank discovered that she possesses old documents that prove fraud in his early land acquisitions." Reginald was silent, processing the implications of this information. What kind of documents? Original deeds that show that Frank used false identities and bribery to buy land that belonged to poor families in the 80s. That's how he started his empire. And why does Cecilia have these documents? Because her late husband worked in the courthouse at the time. He suspected the irregularities and secretly made copies of everything before he retired. The revelation was explosive. If these documents were made public, they would not only destroy Frank financially, but would lead him to prison for fraud and racketeering. Where are these documents now? With Cecilia, hidden somewhere in her house. Frank has been trying to find out where for months, but the old woman is stubborn and refuses to hand them over. And does Willow know this? Not consciously, but Cecilia always said she was the guardian of the family secret. She must have given the girl some clue about where the documents are hidden. Reginald began to understand the real dimension of the situation. Willow was not just an inconvenient witness. She was potentially the key to completely destroying Frank's criminal empire. "We need to talk to Cecilia," he said. "We can't. Frank has men watching her house 24 hours a day. If we try to approach, we'll go straight into a trap." It was at that moment that Willow woke up, rubbing her little eyes and looking confused around. The church in the morning light looked different, more welcoming than during the traumatic events of the night. "Aunt Evelyn," she said with her sleepy little voice, "where are we?" "At the church, honey. Do you remember last night?" Willow nodded slowly, the memories returning gradually. "The bad men wanted to take me. I offered to go with them to protect you." "That was very brave," Reginald said, sitting next to her, "but it was also very dangerous. You can't sacrifice yourself like that." "Why not?" "My grandma always said that good people protect each other." The mention of the grandmother made Evelyn and Reginald exchange meaningful glances. It was the opening they needed. "Willow," Evelyn said carefully, "do you remember your grandma, Cecilia Parker?" The girl's eyes lit up for the first time in days. "Of course! She raised me until God took her to heaven too." "Honey, your grandma didn't go away. She's still alive." Willow was silent for a long moment, processing this impossible information. But she doesn't come to get me. If she's alive, why doesn't she take care of me?" "Because bad men are threatening her too. The same men who came after you last night." "Grandma is in danger?" "She is, and you can help save her." Willow straightened up, her expression becoming serious. Even though she was just a child, she understood instinctively that her family was at risk. "What do I need to do?" Evelyn looked at Reginald, asking for silent permission to continue. He nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Your grandma has some important papers hidden, papers that can stop the bad men forever. Do you remember her showing you any special hiding places?" Willow thought for a moment, her little forehead furrowed in concentration. "She always showed me her music box. She said it had the most important secret of the family inside." "What kind of box?" "A little box, pink, that played a pretty song when it opened. She kept it in a secret drawer behind the wardrobe." Reginald felt a surge of hope. If they could retrieve those documents, they would not only have a way to stop Frank, but also to ensure the safety of Willow and Cecilia. "Willow," he said, "would you be brave enough to take us to that music box? But the bad men are watching Grandma's house. We'll find a way to distract them. You would just need to show us where the hiding place is." The girl considered the proposal seriously. "If I do this, will Grandma be safe? And you too? If we get those papers, the bad men won't be able to threaten anyone anymore." "Then I'll do it." At that moment, Reginald's phone rang. It was Owen, his voice trembling with nervousness. "Reginald, you need to come to my office now. Frank is here with the sales papers. He wants you to sign everything this morning. Tell him I'm coming, but only if he guarantees that no one will be hurt. He said that if you try anything, there will be consequences for you and for all the people you care about." The threat was clear. Frank was forcing a situation where Reginald would have to choose between his financial freedom and the safety of the people he loved. After hanging up the phone, Reginald turned to Evelyn and Willow. I have to go sign the sales papers for the gas stations. It's the only way to keep you safe for now. What about Grandma Cecilia's documents? We'll have to try to retrieve them later. But first, I need to make sure Frank doesn't do anything desperate. Willow stood up and held Reginald's hand with her little hands. Uncle Reginald, you won't give up on me and Grandma, will you? Never, he promised, kneeling down to be at her eye level. I'll find a way to keep us all safe and together, even if it costs all your money, especially if it costs all my money. An hour later, Reginald was leaving the Harmony Creek Community Church towards Owen's office, leaving Willow under the protection of Evelyn and Father Michael. He didn't know he was walking straight into an even more elaborate trap, and that Frank had prepared a final surprise that would test all the limits of his determination to protect the girl who had saved his soul. Meanwhile, in a simple house on the outskirts of town, Cecilia Parker watched through the window the men who were guarding her property and whispered a silent prayer for the safety of her granddaughter, unaware that very soon Willow would be on her way home. Owen's office was tense as a violin string about to snap when Reginald arrived. Frank was sitting behind the desk as if he owned the place, surrounded by piles of legal documents and contracts. Owen remained standing beside him, visibly nervous and avoiding eye contact with his betrayed boss. "Reginald," Frank said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "what admirable punctuality. I see you finally understood the seriousness of the situation." "I came to sign your damn papers," Reginald replied, his voice full of bitterness. "But I want written guarantees that Willow, Evelyn, and Father Michael will not be bothered." "Oh, but you're not in a position to make demands." Frank leaned back in his chair, savoring his moment of victory. "In fact, I discovered interesting information about your little protégé." Reginald's heart raced. "What information?" "I found out that she's not just an inconvenient witness. She's the granddaughter of Cecilia Parker, a stubborn old woman who possesses documents that could cause problems for my business." Reginald tried to maintain a neutral expression, but Frank was too experienced not to notice his reaction. "I see you already knew that. Interesting." Frank got up and walked to the window. "This completely changes the terms of our negotiation." "How so?" "How so that now I don't just want your gas stations. I want you to hand over the girl and the documents she can access. She's just a 4-year-old child. She doesn't know anything about documents." "Don't underestimate children, Reginald. They often know more than they let on." Frank turned around, his eyes gleaming with malice. "And considering the emotional attachment she has for her grandmother, I'm sure she knows exactly where the papers are hidden." Owen, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "Frank, this has gone too far. You promised it would only be about business. Now you're talking about a child." "Shut up, Owen. You have no right to have an opinion after years of passing me information." Frank approached the accountant. "In fact, you've become a liability. You know too much about our operation." The implicit threat made Owen pale. Reginald realized that Frank had no intention of leaving live witnesses, including his own accomplice. "Frank," Reginald said, trying to divert attention to himself, "leave Owen out of this. If you want the documents, I'll find a way to get them, but I need time. Time is exactly what you don't have." Frank returned to the table and opened a folder. "I received information that some locals are getting suspicious about the presence of my men. Soon someone may contact authorities from outside the town." "And what's your plan?" "Simple. You're going to hand over the girl today. I'll take her to talk to her grandmother, and together they'll show me where the documents are. After that—" Frank shrugged. "Well, accidents happen." The mask had completely fallen off. Frank was openly talking about murdering a child and an elderly woman. "I'll never hand Willow over to you," Reginald said, his voice trembling with anger. "Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you're arrested today for money laundering. And while you rot in jail, I'll go after the girl anyway." Frank threw some photos on the table. They were images of Reginald signing contracts, attending meetings, authorizing transfers. To any investigator, it would seem clear evidence of active participation in criminal schemes. You documented everything, Reginald murmured, flipping through the photos. Of course, I always knew this day would come. Owen was very helpful taking these photos during our business meetings. Owen lowered his head, the shame evident in his posture. Reginald, I'm so sorry. He forced me. Enough, Frank roared. Owen, you're going to call the police and report Reginald for money laundering. You'll say you discovered the irregularities and that your conscience no longer allows you to cover up the crimes. I can't do that. You can and you will. Because if you don't, your family will pay the price. Remember your wife coming back from work every night, the way your children go from school to home? The threat to his children broke Owen's final resistance. With trembling hands, he reached for the phone. Wait, Reginald said. Owen, don't do it. There's another way out. What way out? Frank asked, amused. I hand over the documents, you keep my gas stations, and we all leave town, forever. Interesting. But how do I guarantee you won't come back for revenge? Because I'll be broke and without resources, and because all that matters to me now is keeping Willow safe. Frank considered the proposal for a long moment. Very well, but with one additional condition. You bring the girl here now so I can verify if she really knows where the documents are. No. Then Owen makes the call. The stalemate was complete. Reginald knew he couldn't hand over Willow, but he also couldn't allow Owen to be forced to destroy his own life. It was at that moment that Frank's phone rang. He answered it irritably, but his expression quickly changed to alarm. What do you mean she's not there? He shouted on the phone. You had a simple mission. Reginald felt a pang of hope. Something had gone wrong with Frank's plans. Find her, Frank continued. Search the whole town if necessary, and send more men to watch the old lady Cecilia's house. When he hung up, Frank was visibly furious. It seems your little protégé escaped from the Harmony Creek Community Church. My men lost her. Willow escaped? For now. But she's a 4-year-old in a small town. She can't go far. Frank turned to Butch, who had entered the office during the call. How many men do we have on the street? 8, scattered around town. But she's small and knows hiding places we can't even imagine. Double the searches. And if they don't find her in 2 hours, grab the grandmother. That'll make the girl appear. Reginald realized that the situation had become even more desperate. Willow was alone in the town, being hunted by experienced criminals, and now Cecilia was also in immediate danger. Frank, stop this. I'll turn myself in. I'll sign everything, hand over everything, but stop chasing a child. It's not just about money anymore, Reginald. Now it's about survival. Those documents can completely destroy me. I need them, and I need to make sure no one else knows of their existence. What if I get the documents without involving Willow? How? Cecilia is an elderly and fragile woman. I can convince her to hand me the papers in exchange for her granddaughter's safety. Frank considered the proposal. You have 1 hour. If you don't come back with the documents, I'll start breaking people until someone tells me where they are. Reginald left the office with a heavy heart, knowing that he had just bought time, but that he was still far from a real solution. As he walked through the streets of Harmony Creek, his mind worked frantically trying to find a way to save Willow, Cecilia, and even Owen, who was trapped in Frank's web of blackmail. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, Willow was not fleeing Frank's henchmen. She was hiding in the attic of the same abandoned house where she had taken refuge the night before, but this time with a plan of her own. The brave girl had decided that she would not run anymore. It was time to go home and face the bad men who were threatening her family. And in the bottom of her small pocket she clutched a small golden key that her grandmother had given her years ago, saying that one day she would understand its importance. That day had arrived. Cecilia Parker's house was on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, on a dirt road surrounded by other simple buildings and yards with chickens. It was a small house, with 2 bedrooms, painted light blue with white windows, exactly as Willow remembered from the happy times she had spent there with her grandmother. Hidden behind a leafy tree 2 blocks away, Willow watched the 2 men who were standing guard in front of the house. They were clearly bored, smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices, but their eyes were constantly scanning the street for any suspicious movement. The girl had taken almost 3 hours to get there, moving carefully through the back streets and using all the urban survival tricks she had learned during months of living alone. Her small hand clutched the golden key in her pocket, remembering her grandmother's words, "One day, my little warrior, you will need to be brave to protect our family." That day had arrived. Willow knew she couldn't just walk to the front door. She needed to find a way to enter the house without being seen by the guards. She then remembered something important. There was a small window in the back bathroom that never closed properly and that her grandmother always complained she needed to fix. Circling the block along a route that kept her out of sight of the thugs, Willow approached the house from the back. The yard was exactly as she remembered. A small chicken coop, some spice plants, and the old mango tree that her grandmother used to water the flowers. The bathroom window was ajar, as always. Willow managed to open it enough to pass her small body, although it took several attempts and she almost fell into the sink. Once inside the house, the girl moved like a ghost, her bare feet making no noise on the wooden floor she knew by heart. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The old furniture, the smell of lavender that her grandmother always used, the family photographs on the walls. It was then that she heard a low sound coming from the main bedroom. Her grandmother was humming a lullaby, the same one she used to sing to Willow to fall asleep. "Grandma?" Willow whispered, appearing in the bedroom door. Cecilia Parker was sitting in her rocking chair, knitting a small cardigan. When she saw her granddaughter, her hands trembled and the knitting fell to the floor. "Willow, my girl, is it really you?" The girl ran into her grandmother's arms, and the 2 hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down both of their faces. Cecilia seemed more fragile than Willow remembered, her hair whiter, her hands more trembling, but her hug was still the same safe haven it had always been. "Grandma, why didn't you come to get me? I thought you had died too." "My dear girl," Cecilia said, stroking her granddaughter's hair, "I wanted so much to come and get you. But bad men told me that if I tried, they would harm you. The same men who are watching the house now. Yes, they want something that belongs to our family, something your grandfather left me before he went to heaven." Willow took the golden key out of her pocket. "Is this what they want, Grandma? The key you gave me?" Cecilia's eyes widened as she saw the little key. "My God, you kept it all this time." "I kept it. You said it was important." "Very important, my dear. This key opens a safe where papers are kept that can stop the bad men forever." "Then let's get them." Cecilia got up from the chair with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "It's behind the wardrobe, in a hole in the wall that your grandfather made many years ago." The 2 headed to the back room, where an old dark wood wardrobe occupied almost an entire wall. With some effort, they managed to pull it away enough to reveal a small safe built into the wall, disguised by a loose board. Willow inserted the golden key into the lock. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing a pile of documents, yellowed with time, old photographs, and several deeds with official seals. "Are these the papers that will stop the bad men?" "Yes, my warrior. These documents prove that the man who is threatening us stole land from poor families many years ago. If the authorities see, that's it, he's going to prison." Just then, they heard loud voices coming from the front of the house. Someone was arguing with the guards. "It's Uncle Reginald," Willow whispered, recognizing the voice immediately. Cecilia frowned. "Who's Reginald?" "A good man who's protecting me. He was bad before, but now he's good." "How do you know he's good now?" "Because he was willing to lose all his money to keep me safe." The child's simple answer deeply touched Cecilia. During her 74 years of life, she had learned to judge people by their actions, not their words. "Let me see this man," she said, walking to the front window. Reginald was on the street, arguing with the two guards. He looked tired and desperate, but his posture was firm and determined. "I just want to talk to Mrs. Parker," he said. 5 minutes. I won't hurt her." "Boss said no one comes in," one of the goons replied. "Then tell your boss I have a proposition that will interest him." Cecilia studied Reginald for a long moment. There was something in the way he spoke, in the genuine concern in his eyes, that convinced her Willow was right about him. "Grandma," Willow whispered, "we can trust him. He saved me from the bad men several times." "All right, my little warrior. Let's let him in." Cecilia opened the window and shouted, "Boys, let the man in. I want to talk to him." The guards hesitated, but after a quick call to Frank, they allowed Reginald to approach the house. When Reginald entered and saw Willow embraced by her grandmother, his face lit up with relief and joy. "Willow, thank God you're okay. We were all worried. Uncle Reginald, this is my Grandma Cecilia. Grandma, this is Uncle Reginald I told you about." "Mrs. Parker," Reginald said, respectfully removing his hat, "I'm so sorry for everything that happened. For not protecting Willow better, for her having to spend so much time alone on the streets." "You took care of my granddaughter when I couldn't," Cecilia replied. "That means everything to me." "We need to get you out of here," Reginald said urgently. "Frank's getting desperate. He'll do anything to get those documents." It was then that Willow showed him the stack of papers she had taken from the safe. "Uncle Reginald, these are the papers the bad men want. Grandma said they can put the bad man in prison." Reginald quickly examined the documents, his eyes widening as he realized the magnitude of the evidence. There were forged deeds, photographs of bribes being paid, correspondence proving conspiracy. It was enough material to completely destroy Frank and send several of his associates to prison. "My God," he murmured, "this is more than enough to take Frank down." "Then why don't we take it to the police?" Willow asked. "Because Frank has contacts in the local police. We need to hand this over to authorities from out of town." At that moment, they heard the sound of cars approaching. Through the windows, they saw that it wasn't just the two original guards. Frank had arrived with 4 more men. "He's lost his patience," Reginald said, quickly stuffing the documents into a bag. "We have to get out of here. Now." "Where to?" Cecilia asked, clearly frightened by the whole situation. "Is there a back exit?" Reginald asked. "There's a little door that leads to Mrs. Mercedes's yard," Willow replied. "She always leaves it open." Reginald picked Willow up and helped Cecilia to her feet. "Let's go. We need to get to the car before they surround the house." But as they headed to the back, they heard Frank shouting outside, "Reginald, I know you're in there. Come out with the girl and the documents or we're coming in shooting." The threat was real and immediate. "Grandma," Willow said, looking into her grandmother's eyes with a determination that defied her age, "remember what you always taught me about being brave?" "I remember, my little warrior." "Then it's time for us to be brave together." And with those words, the 4-year-old who had survived months on the streets, saved a man in the alley, and faced dangerous criminals, was ready for her last act of courage, a plan that would save her family and put an end to Frank Barnes's reign of terror forever. Reginald realized that Frank had completely lost control and was willing to use extreme violence to get what he wanted. "Uncle Reginald," Willow said, her little voice steady despite Frank's threatening shouts outside, "I have an idea, but you have to trust me." Reginald knelt down to her eye level, holding her small hands. "Willow, it's too dangerous. Frank's completely lost it. That's exactly why my idea might work." The girl looked at her grandmother. "Grandma, remember the story you used to tell me about the evil giant and the brave girl?" Cecilia nodded, her eyes filling with tears as she realized that her granddaughter had grown far beyond her 4 years of age. "I remember, my little warrior. The girl used the giant's own greed against him." "Exactly," Willow turned to Reginald. The bad man wants the papers more than anything, right? Right. And he thinks I'm just a little kid who doesn't understand anything? He does. Then let's give him exactly what he wants, but the way we want. Frank's shouts were getting louder and more impatient. Reginald, you have 10 seconds to come out, or we're breaking down the door. Tell me your plan quickly, Reginald said, feeling the panic rising. Willow took the documents from the bag and examined them carefully. Grandma has an old typewriter in her room, right, Grandma? Yes, I do, but I don't understand. And do you have carbon paper too? That paper that makes copies when you write? I have it, but my dear... Perfect. Willow quickly headed to the room. Uncle Reginald, you go out and tell the bad man that I agree to trade the papers for Grandma's safety, but that I'll only hand them over to him personally, here inside the house. Willow, that's too dangerous. He might hurt you. He won't, because he needs me to understand the papers, and because you'll be hidden nearby. Reginald hesitated, but the sounds of wood splintering indicated that Frank had begun to force the front door. They had no more time to argue. What exactly do you want me to do? Say that I'll hand over the documents, but only if he comes alone. A child is afraid of a lot of big men together. The logic was simple, but effective. Frank would be so eager to get the documents that he would probably accept any condition. Reginald went out the front door with his hands raised. Frank, stop! The girl wants to negotiate! Frank, who was wielding an axe against the door, stopped and turned around. His face was red with anger and impatience. What negotiation? Willow found the documents. She's willing to hand them over in exchange for her grandmother's safety. Then bring the papers now. She's scared. She wants you to come in alone to talk. A scared child doesn't trust groups of men. Frank looked at his goons, then at the house. His greed was clearly fighting against his caution. How do I know it's not a trap? Because she's a 4-year-old, Frank. What trap can a child set? Frank's arrogance spoke louder. He truly believed that a little girl posed no threat at all. All right, but if she tries anything, Willow just wants to protect her grandmother. Nothing more. Frank entered the house alone, leaving his men outside. He found Willow sitting in the living room, appearing to be a scared and vulnerable child, with a stack of documents beside her. So, little one, he said, trying to sound gentle but failing miserably, I heard you have something that belongs to me. The papers don't belong to you, Willow replied, her voice trembling slightly. But I'll give them to you if you promise not to hurt my grandma. Sure. I won't hurt anyone. I just want the papers. Willow pushed the stack of documents towards him. They're all here, everything my grandfather kept. Frank eagerly grabbed the papers, leafing through them quickly. They were exactly what he feared. Complete evidence of his initial frauds, compromising photographs, letters proving corruption. Everything was there. Perfect, he murmured, a cruel smile forming on his lips. Now there's nothing that can hurt me anymore. Are you sure about that? Willow asked, her voice changing subtly. What do you mean? Are you sure these are all the papers? Frank stopped smiling. What are you talking about? My grandfather was very clever. He knew that bad men like you would always try to steal the important papers. Willow got up from the chair, her posture changing from a scared child to someone in control of the situation. That's why he made copies. Copies? 3 complete sets of all the documents. One he hid in the safe, another he gave to the priest in the next town, and the third... Willow smiled. The third is on its way to the state capital right now. Frank's face paled. You're lying. Am I? Are you willing to bet your freedom on it? At that moment, Reginald and Cecilia came out of their hiding places. Reginald was holding a cell phone. Actually, Frank, Reginald said, I just finished sending pictures of all the documents to an investigative journalist in Oklahoma City, and to the state attorney general, too. That's impossible. You didn't have time. Willow laughed, a sound that contained more wisdom than any child should have. Uncle Reginald, show him. Reginald displayed the phone, showing dozens of high-quality photographs of the documents, all with the date and time of the last 15 minutes. "While you were screaming outside like a madman," Reginald explained, "we were photographing every page, every piece of evidence, and using Mrs. Mercedes' Wi-Fi to send everything." Frank looked at the documents in his hands, realizing that they were useless now. The evidence was already in the hands of the competent authorities. You betrayed me." "No," Willow said calmly. "We stopped you. My grandma always taught me that good people protect each other from bad men." Frank lunged towards Willow, but Reginald quickly placed himself between them. "Don't touch her. I'm going to kill all of you." "No, you're not," a new voice said from the door. Everyone turned to see Evelyn entering the house, accompanied by two men in suits who clearly weren't from Harmony Creek. "Agents Fraser and Stone, FBI," one of them said, showing his identification. "Franklin Barnes, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, document fraud, and endangering a minor." "How did you get here so fast?" Reginald asked, surprised. "Because," Evelyn said with a smile, "I called them 3 hours ago. When I found out that Willow had run away to come here, I knew she was planning something brave, and I thought she might need official help." The agents handcuffed Frank, who was in a state of total shock. His goons outside were detained by the reinforcements that had arrived with the feds. "But how did you know about the documents?" asked Agent Fraser. "Because," Willow said, walking up to him with the confidence of someone who had just defeated a giant, "I called Aunt Evelyn and told her everything before coming here. My grandma always said that smart people make plans, and very smart people make plans with help." Cecilia hugged her granddaughter with tears of pride in her eyes. "My little warrior has grown up." "Grandma," Willow said, "can we stay together forever now?" "Forever, my dear, and with our expanded family too." She looked at Reginald and Evelyn, who had become an essential part of their lives. "Expanded family?" Reginald asked. "Well," Cecilia said with a smile, "a brave girl like Willow deserves to have all the good people who love her around. And you two clearly belong in that category." As the agents left with Frank and his men, Willow could finally relax. She was back in her grandmother's lap, surrounded by people who loved her, and the bad men were going where they couldn't hurt anyone anymore. "Uncle Reginald," she said sleepily, "did you lose all your money because of me?" "I did, but I gained something much more valuable." "What?" "A real family." And as the sun set over Harmony Creek, a 4-year-old girl who had faced the whole world to protect those she loved could finally sleep in peace, knowing that she would never be alone again. A week had passed since Frank Barnes's arrest, and Harmony Creek was still processing the seismic changes that had shaken the small town. The news of the FBI operation had spread like wildfire, and reporters from all over the state arrived daily to cover the story of the 4-year-old who had brought down a criminal empire. Reginald was sitting on a bench in the town square, watching Willow play with other children for the first time in months. The girl had transformed in recent days, gradually recovering the joy and spontaneity that a child her age should have. But even as she played, he could see in her eyes a maturity that should never exist in someone so young. "How are you feeling?" Evelyn asked, sitting down beside him. "Relieved, scared, grateful." Reginald sighed deeply. "And completely broke." It was true. The FBI investigations had frozen all of Reginald's business accounts while they separated the legal money from the illegal. His gas stations were under judicial administration, and he had lost practically everything he owned, except his house. "Do you regret it?" "Regret losing the money? Not at all. Regret not acting sooner to protect Willow. Every day." Owen approached the two, walking slowly like someone carrying an invisible weight. The accountant had cooperated completely with the authorities, providing details about years of fraudulent operations. In exchange for his collaboration, he would receive a reduced sentence, but would still face some years in prison. "Reginald," he said, his voice laden with guilt, I wanted to talk to you before I turn myself into the authorities tomorrow. Owen, you don't need to... Yes, I do. I need to ask for your forgiveness. Not just for the financial irregularities, but for putting you, Willow, and so many other people in danger. Danger because of my cowardice. Reginald stood up and extended his hand to the man who had been his employee for over a decade. Owen, we all make bad decisions when we're desperate. The important thing is that you did the right thing in the end. My family, they're going to struggle while I'm in prison. They won't. Reginald pulled an envelope from his pocket. It's a letter of recommendation. I have a friend in Oklahoma City who needs an honest accountant. He'll give your wife a job. Owen took the letter with trembling hands. Why are you helping me after everything I've done? Because a 4-year-old girl taught me that people can change, and that sometimes showing mercy is more powerful than seeking revenge. After Owen walked away, Evelyn watched Reginald with admiration. You've really changed. Willow changed me. She saved more than my life in that alley. She saved my soul. At that moment, Cecilia approached the bench, leaning on her cane. At 74, she had proven surprisingly resilient throughout the ordeal, but now she seemed exhausted. How are you feeling, Mrs. Parker? Evelyn asked. Old and tired, she replied honestly, but happy. My granddaughter is safe, the bad men are in jail, and our family is reunited. And the reporters, are they bothering you much? A little, but Willow is smart. She told them she only talked about happy things, not about sad things. They eventually gave up asking difficult questions. Reginald smiled. Even dealing with the media, Willow demonstrated an impressive practical wisdom. Mrs. Parker, he said, there's something I'd like to discuss with you about the future. What kind of future? Well, I've lost almost everything I had. My house is too big for one person and, well, I thought maybe you'd like to live there. At least until we decide what to do in the long term. Cecilia studied Reginald's face carefully. Are you offering us charity? I'm offering family. Willow already calls me uncle. Evelyn has become like a sister to me, and you, well, I always wanted to have a mother who accepted me the way I am. The proposal deeply touched Cecilia. Throughout her life, she had been an independent and proud woman. But now she recognized that she needed help to properly care for Willow. And if I accept, what would the conditions be? That Willow grows up in an environment full of love, that she has a quality education, and that we all take care of each other like a real family. And if I get sick, if I become a burden, then we'll do what families do. We'll take care of each other. Cecilia nodded slowly. All right, but I want to contribute too. I still have some money saved and I can help with expenses. Mrs. Parker, after everything you've been through? Exactly. Because of that, I want Willow to learn that family is about contributing and sharing, not about receiving charity. That afternoon, the four of them gathered at Reginald's house to discuss the practical arrangements of their new life together. Willow was delighted with the idea of having her own room and a large yard to play in. Uncle Reginald, she said, exploring the spacious living room, your house is very big. Can we put lots of toys here? We can put everything you want, my little one. And can I have a dog, if your grandmother lets you? Can I, Grandma? Cecilia laughed, the first truly carefree laugh she had had in months. Of course you can, my little warrior. A brave girl like you deserves to have a furry friend. While Willow explored the house with the excitement of a normal child, the three adults sat down to talk about more serious matters. Reginald, Cecilia said, I need to tell you something about the documents Willow found. What? They weren't just evidence against Frank. There were also documents proving that several properties in the area were acquired illegally. This means that many poor families are entitled to compensation. Compensation? Money, land, reparations. The federal government will have to return much of what has been stolen over the years. Evelyn perked up. Does this mean that many people in town will have their lives improved? Exactly. The suffering we went through wasn't in vain. It will help hundreds of families. Reginald felt a wave of deep satisfaction. Willow hadn't just saved her own family. She had inadvertently helped an entire community. "There's something else," Cecilia continued. "The investigators discovered that Frank embezzled much more money than we imagined. When everything is recovered and distributed, Harmony Creek will receive investments in schools, health clinics, and social programs." "Willow really saved the whole town," Reginald murmured with admiration. That night, after Cecilia and Willow settled into their new rooms, Reginald and Evelyn sat on the porch of the house, watching the stars over Harmony Creek. "Are you scared?" Evelyn asked. "Of what?" "Of being responsible for a child. Of being a real family," Reginald thought for a moment. "I'm terrified. I don't know anything about being a father or taking care of children. What if I screw everything up?" "You won't screw it up. You know how I know?" "How?" "Because you care enough to be afraid of screwing it up. Bad parents don't worry about that." "And you? Are you scared?" "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I lost a daughter, and now I have the chance to help raise another. What if I can't protect Willow?" "You already protected her. For months when she was alone and scared, you were the only person who showed kindness. Without you, she would never have survived long enough to save us all." They were silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the future. "Reginald," Evelyn said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Did you really lose everything? All your money?" "Almost everything. Just enough left to maintain this house and take care of the family. And you don't regret it?" Reginald looked through the lit window where he could see Willow showing her drawings to Cecilia, the two laughing together as if they had never been separated. "Evelyn, for 40 years I accumulated money and property, thinking that it would give me security and happiness. But I've never felt as rich as I feel now, at this moment, knowing that that extraordinary girl considers me family. Even knowing that things are going to be difficult financially, especially knowing that, because now I know that no matter what happens, I won't face it alone. I have people who love me and that I love back." The next morning, Willow woke up early and found Reginald in the kitchen preparing breakfast. It was the first morning of her new life, and she wanted to make sure everything was really real. "Uncle Reginald," she said, "you promise you won't send me away ever?" "I promise, my little warrior. You're family now, and family never abandons family. Even if I do bad things. Even then, real families stick together in good times and bad times." Willow smiled and hugged his legs. "Then I have a big family now. You Aunt Evelyn, Grandma Cecilia, Father Michael, and even Beverly from the hospital, who was always nice to me. That's right. You have a lot of people who love you, and I love them all too." And at that moment, while embracing a girl who had changed his life forever, Reginald understood that he had discovered the true measure of wealth. It wasn't what you possessed, but how many people were willing to fight for you when you needed it most. The golden sun of a March morning bathed the backyard of Reginald's house, where Willow, now 5 years old, played with Honey, a golden mutt that had been rescued from the street 3 months ago. The girl had insisted on giving it that name because she's sweet like honey, and she was also abandoned like me. A year had passed since the events that forever changed the lives of everyone in Harmony Creek. The town had been completely transformed. With the money recovered from Frank's fraudulent operations, new schools were built, the health clinic was expanded, and social programs were implemented to ensure that no child would have to live on the streets again. Reginald was in the kitchen, preparing the special breakfast that had become a tradition on Sundays, animal-shaped pancakes, which always made Willow laugh and create elaborate stories about each one. His hair, now with more visible grey strands, reflected the stress of the previous year, but his eyes sparkled with a happiness he had never experienced in his days of material wealth. "Uncle Reginald!" Willow shouted, running into the house with Honey behind her. "Teacher Anne said I'm the best student in the class at drawing." "I'm so proud," he replied, picking her up. "And what did you draw this time?" "Our family. Do you want to see?" Willow showed a colourful drawing where 5 figures were holding hands in front of a house. Her, Reginald, Evelyn, Cecilia, and even Honey appeared on the paper, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. "It's beautiful, my little artist, but someone's missing." "Who?" "Father Michael. Isn't he part of our family too?" Willow slapped her forehead with her palm. "I forgot. I'll draw him after breakfast." Evelyn arrived from the Harmony Creek Community Church, where she had officially started working as the coordinator of social programs. Her experience caring for those in need, combined with her genuine dedication, had made her a fundamental piece in the social transformation of Harmony Creek. "Good morning, family," she said, kissing the top of Willow's head. "How is our little celebrity today?" "Evelyn, don't call her that," Reginald asked. "She's still just a child." It was true that Willow had become nationally famous. The story of the orphaned girl who brought down a corruption scheme had inspired books, documentaries, and even a movie proposal. But Reginald and Cecilia were firm in protecting her privacy and normalcy. "Aunt Evelyn," Willow said, "did you know that Mrs. Mercedes is going to get a new house?" "Yes, I did. The government is compensating all the families who were harmed by Frank's frauds. And will she let me visit her backyard? She has the best plums in town there." "I'm sure she will, dear." Cecilia came downstairs slowly, leaning on her cane. At 75, she had adapted surprisingly well to life in Reginald's house, becoming the matriarch of the unlikely family they had formed. Her health had improved significantly since she regained custody of Willow, as if having her granddaughter around was the best medicine possible. "Grandma!" exclaimed Willow, running to hug her. "I dreamed about you yesterday." "You dreamed? And what was I doing in your dream?" "You were teaching me how to knit, just like you promised you would." "Oh, that's right. This afternoon you have your first knitting lesson." During breakfast, the conversation naturally turned to the plans for the day. It was Sunday, the day of the week that they had dedicated exclusively for family activities, without work or external obligations. "What do you think about going to the new park?" Reginald suggested. "Willow hasn't played on the toys that were installed last week yet." "Can I take Honey?" Willow asked. "Of course, but she stays on the leash." "And can we have a picnic?" "We sure can," Evelyn said. "I'll make some sandwiches." While they were organizing for the outing, the phone rang. It was Robert Mendez, the lawyer who had become a friend of the family during the legal processes of the previous year. "Reginald," Robert said, "I have news about the financial compensation." "What compensation?" "The government has decided that you are also entitled to compensation. Your companies were involuntarily used for money laundering, causing damage to your reputation and finances." Reginald was silent for a moment. "How much?" $2 million. The amount was significant, more than enough to recover a substantial part of his previous wealth. But strangely, Reginald didn't feel the euphoria he expected to feel. "Robert, I'll call you back. I need to talk to my family about this." After hanging up, Reginald sat at the kitchen table where Willow was finishing her butterfly-shaped pancakes. "Was it about money?" asked Cecilia, who had noticed the thoughtful expression on his face. "It was. The government wants to give me a compensation of $2 million for the losses I had." "That's a lot of money!" exclaimed Willow. "Are you going to be rich again?" The girl's innocent question made Reginald reflect on how to answer her. "Willow, can I ask you a question?" "Sure. Do you think I'm poor now?" Willow looked around the cozy kitchen, where Evelyn was preparing sandwiches, humming. Cecilia was carefully organizing the medications, and Honey slept peacefully in her corner. Then she looked at Reginald with her big, wise eyes. "No, Uncle Reginald. You're very rich. Why?" Because you have a family that loves you, a warm house, tasty food, and real friends. My grandma always said that a rich person is someone who has enough love. Willow's answer deeply touched everyone present. Reginald knelt beside her chair. What if I use that money to help other people, other children who are going through what you went through? Willow's eyes lit up. Can we make a big house where orphaned children can stay? With lots of rooms and a huge yard? We sure can. What do you think? He asked, looking at Evelyn and Cecilia. I think it would be the best way to use that money, Evelyn said. You could create a temporary home for children at risk. And I could help, said Cecilia. I know a lot about taking care of children. Me too, said Willow. I can teach them how to be brave when they're scared. That afternoon, at the new park in Harmony Creek, Reginald's family spread out on the grass for the picnic. Willow played with Honey, while the adults talked about plans for the future shelter they intended to create. You know, Evelyn said, watching Willow teach tricks to the dog, sometimes I think about what our lives would be like if she hadn't appeared in that alley. I would still be a bitter and selfish man, Reginald replied. You would still be alone with your grief over the loss of Sophia, and Mrs. Cecilia would be blackmailed by Frank. And how many other children would be suffering on the streets, Cecilia added. It's incredible, Evelyn murmured, how such a small person could cause such big changes. It wasn't just her, Reginald said. It was her kindness that awakened kindness in all of us. It was as if she had lit a light that spread throughout the whole town. At that moment, Willow ran to them, breathless and excited. Did you see? Honey learned to give paw. We saw, my little warrior, Cecilia said. You're a good teacher. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you call me a warrior? Cecilia smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. Because you fought giants much bigger than you and won. Because you protected your family even when you were scared. And because you have a brave heart that never gives up on doing what's right. And will I keep being a warrior? Always. But now you're going to be a different kind of warrior. One who fights for the good of other people, who uses her courage to help those in need. Willow nodded seriously, as if she were accepting an important mission. So, when our children's home is ready, I'm going to teach them how to be warriors too. You sure are, Reginald promised, and they'll learn from the best. As the sun began to set over Harmony Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the family began to pack up the picnic. Willow was tired but happy, dozing off in Reginald's arms as they walked back home. Uncle Reginald, she murmured, are you happy? Very happy, my little one. Happier than I ever thought was possible. Even having less money than before? Especially because of that. Because I learned that true wealth isn't the things you own, but the people you love and who love you back. And will we always love each other? Forever and always, he promised, kissing the top of her head. That night, after Willow fell asleep in her bed, surrounded by her drawings, and with Honey sleeping at the foot of the bed, Reginald sat in his favorite armchair in the living room, looking at the family photographs that now decorated the walls. There were photos of Willow's first day of school, of Cecilia's 75th birthday, of the simple wedding that he and Evelyn had had 6 months ago, of the opening of the new town park. Each image told the story of a life rebuilt, of a family formed not by blood but by choice and love. Evelyn approached and sat beside him. What are you thinking about? About how a year can change everything. About how a child can teach a 50-year-old man what really matters in life. Do you regret anything? I regret taking so long to find you, but I don't regret anything that happened after Willow came into our lives. Not even losing your fortune? Especially that. Because if I were still as rich as before, maybe I would never have learned the real value of generosity, of humility, of true love. The next morning, Reginald called Robert and communicated his decision. He would use all the financial compensation to create the Willow Warrior Shelter, a temporary home for children at risk, where they would receive not only shelter and food, but love, education, and the chance to discover their own courage. And so 2 years after that fateful day in the alley, when a 4-year-old girl had saved the life of a cruel man, the story came to its true end, not with recovered material wealth or satisfied revenges, but with the creation of something even more valuable, a legacy of love that would spread for generations. Willow would grow up to become a social educator, dedicating her life to helping other children in situations of vulnerability. Reginald and Evelyn would create one of the most respected shelters in the state. Cecilia would live to see her great-grandchildren playing in the same yard where her granddaughter had found happiness. And in Harmony Creek, whenever someone asked about the time when the town changed for the better, the residents would tell the story of the little warrior who proved that the greatest wealth in the world isn't in vaults or banks, but in the courage of a child who chose to save instead of save herself, to love instead of hate, and to build instead of destroy. The end of a story, the beginning of a legend, and the proof that sometimes the smallest warriors are capable of the greatest victories. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.